Bioparc Fuengirola is one of those zoos that look amazing at first glance. Impressive scenery with plenty of jungle flair is of course a big plus for a zoo that focuses on tropical animals. But if you've been following my videos for a while, you'll know that good scenery doesn't necessarily mean that animal husbandry is also on a good level. And with just around 22 square meters of space, the number of larger, more demanding animals is certainly a cause for concern. Can gorillas, Malayan tapirs, tigers and the likes really be provided with good living conditions here? I definitely traveled to Fuengirola with a bit of skepticism, and unfortunately that wasn't entirely unfounded. But there were also things that really impressed me, especially the expansion area completed in 2024, which is truly excellent for the most part. In any case, I'm happy to present another really interesting Spanish zoo to you today, and I hope you'll join me on my tour. Let's see whether a visit here is really worth it. Vamos! Fuengirola is located on Spain's Mediterranean coast between Marbella and Malaga, and the biopark is situated right in the middle of the densely populated city. Surrounded by streets and residential buildings, you might not expect it at first, but once you pass through the entrance, you're essentially stepping into a different world. You're entering a green oasis completely cut off from the hustle and bustle of the city. And it also immediately becomes clear how skillfully the enclosures are integrated into the thoughtfully designed park. On an island, you can discover a total of 4 lemur species, ring-tailed lemurs included of course, and you may have already spotted the flamingos, which are kept here right next to them. Opposite, Nile crocodiles are also housed here, and thanks to the warm climate, they can be kept in a more spacious outdoor enclosure. The lemurs also have quite a good amount of space and can climb high up into the trees. They mostly have the island for themselves, as visitors can only enter during feeding times. So at first glance this all looks great, but of course it only works this way with the flamingos because they have clipped or trimmed wings, because an aviary would spoil the overall look. And while one can argue in the case of large pond enclosures that flightless flamingos can at least be offered a more vast area to live in, here it is relatively cramped. And the Abdim storks who live among the lemurs are of course likewise unable to fly. We now move deeper into the first section of the zoo, which is dedicated to equatorial Africa. Ground cranes are once again kept unable to fly, and here they live together with sitatungas. Unfortunately in an enclosure where my uneasy feeling about the available space feels confirmed. And while with the red river hawks opposite, I would be more inclined to comment on the somewhat sparse furnishing, I have definitely seen significantly larger meerkat enclosures. And both the enclosures for the rarely kept western blue duiker and the dwarf crocodile are, let's say, rather on the small side. Conceptually, it's certainly very well done how you are guided here through an artificial tree trunk, past several integrated terrariums, towards the pygmy hippos. But as nice as the design with artificial rocks, tree trunks and the dense surrounding vegetation may be, the 2 pygmy hippos live here in a very confined space. A sandbank, the pool, and that's about it. From here it's only a short distance to the gorillas and chimpanzees. Beforehand I was most concerned with them because great apes are very demanding animals, and a breeding group of gorillas in particular should have a substantial amount of space available. In fact, their enclosure is probably one of the largest in the entire zoo, but here unfortunately that doesn't mean much. At least it's not just the scenery and the viewing angles that work very well here. The furnishing and structure are quite clever, especially through the use of verticality with tree trunks, rocks and different levels. However, at least when you get to the chimpanzees on the other side of the visitor bridge, it becomes clear that at least some of the enclosures here are now around 25 years old. The park was originally founded in 1978 as a classic city zoo, but was later transformed by the Spanish zoo design company Rainforest into the current Bioparc, which has existed since 2001. And while the visual design has definitely stood the test of time, a quarter of a century later, standards in animal keeping have continued to develop significantly since then. Today, one would hopefully no longer build such a tiny chimpanzee enclosure. I also really don't understand the extensively large water area here. At the very least, that might have been something to adjust. The two chimpanzees do seem to be quite old animals, and at least one of them is also a rescue from a street artist. And I do not think that this enclosure will be rebuilt for a breeding group afterwards, as was done with the gorillas a few years ago. Behind the chimpanzees lies the leopard enclosure. Following the reconstruction of the gorilla habitat, this enclosure was also redesigned in 2018. And while the ground space is also quite limited, the most is made of the vertical space with rocks and complex climbing structures. And as you can see here, the leopards can even climb above the visitor path. That is very well designed, especially since from up there, the leopards can keep a close eye on the activity around them, including in the large aviary behind them. Still, it's not big enough for me to consider it as truly excellent, and I'm especially worried about the separation area behind the scenes. We now move on to Southeast Asia, where we first come across some aviaries, also part of the renovations carried out here in the late 2010s. Here we encounter Spain's only great hornbills, and the feathered hornbills cannot be seen in any other zoo in Spain either. And all good things come in threes, because this also applies to the Papuan hornbill. Their aviaries are on a good, though not outstanding zoo level, but once again they are embedded in an excellent jungle setting. The setting for the Sumatran tigers is, of course, also on point, and the size, structure and furnishing of the enclosure are quite decent as well. But it wasn't surprising to see some stereotypic pacing here, as it is unfortunately quite common in general. We now continue on to the mangroves, where there are only two nicely designed pools. According to the plan, some larger species such as pacus are also supposed to live here, but I only saw smaller species like the Bozeman's rainbow fish. So we move straight on into the first proper indoor area, a hall where you can encounter several free-flying and free-roaming birds. With the crowned pigeons, we have one of the absolute classics of such exhibits, and the Nicobar pigeons are not an uncommon sight in enclosures like this either. In addition, there are also species like masked lapwings or the Edwards pheasant, which is possibly extinct in the wild. However, with its long tail feathers, the great Argus was probably my highlight here. So the Indian flying foxes are right, this is a cool place to hang out. With a bit of more luck, I might have also managed to get a lesser mouse deer on camera in this hall, but the shy little ungulates didn't show themselves. And I'm not entirely sure whether such a rather busy environment is really ideal for them. At the end of the hall, there is also an area with terrariums designed like an abandoned mine. Here you can find caiman lizards, green tree pythons and frilled lizards, all in quite beautiful and competently furnished enclosures. Back outside, there is a play area for children, as well as food options if you need a break. From here we move around a very interesting complex of enclosures, which begins with another outdoor reptile habitat where we can see freshwater turtles and more or less also the false gharials. And if you look really closely here, you can actually spot what lives on the island behind it. Gibbons. And yes, that's the only footage I managed to get of them. Not surprising, as in their actual quite large and densely vegetated enclosure, they can easily avoid the view of visitors. Surrounding their enclosure and adjoining the gharial habitat is the area for pelicans, and finally also the enclosure for the Malayan tapirs, which unfortunately can only be observed from above, almost like looking down into a pit. How much this affects the animals, which in the wild prefer dense undergrowth, I can't say, but visually the effect is definitely rather suboptimal. Aside from that, however, I quite like the overall concept of this complex, especially since I almost missed that binturongs are also housed above the tapirs. With a similar concept, cassowaries and red pandas more or less share the same space here as well, although once again the available area is rather limited, especially for the big cassowary. And the orangutans also share their enclosure with another species, although the combination with small-clawed otters is something you do see quite frequently in zoos. The design of the enclosure is, however, truly unique, as its central feature is a 15-meter high steel tower. It provides the Bornean orangutan family with plenty of climbing opportunities and greatly expands the usable space for them. Visually, it's certainly a bold choice, but that's exactly what makes it memorable, and I really do like the concept of an abandoned mining site being reclaimed by nature. I just wish the theme would be explored a bit more in depth from an educational perspective. All in all, a very unusual but by no means bad enclosure. With intelligent animals like great apes, however, the quality of the husbandry naturally also depends heavily on how well and how diversely the animals are kept occupied. At least breeding seems to be going very well here. Shortly after my visit in April of 2026, another orangutan was born here, completely naturally, right in the enclosure and in full view of astonished visitors. During my visit, however, I did at least get to see a keeper guiding a Komodo dragon into the indoor area. And it was truly fascinating to see how such a dangerous animal is being managed here. Of course, the largest living lizards in the world also benefit from the climate here in Fuengirola, meaning they don't have to live in purely indoor enclosures as they do elsewhere. Instead, they have a beautifully designed and fairly spacious outdoor habitat, and quite possibly the best Komodo dragon enclosure I have seen so far. And with its temple-like appearance, it may even be the most beautiful setting in the entire park for me as well, which is really saying something here. This Indo-Pacific area, opened in 2014, also includes several more aviaries, where, for example, you can see Visayan hornbills. At the other end of the Komodo dragon enclosure, reptile enthusiasts once again get their money's worth. In this indoor area you can see crocodile monitors, as well as blue tree monitors and emerald tree monitors. The Komodo dragons can also be seen here again in an indoor exhibit, which is also very nicely designed with a cave-like atmosphere. Among all these monitor lizards is an imposter. The panther chameleon stands out a bit despite its camouflage, especially since its home, Madagascar, isn't even part of the Indo-Pacific. And hey, the Galapagos Islands are also further east in the Eastern Pacific, but okay, the massive Galapagos giant tortoises certainly form a nice bridge to South America, which is where we are going next, into Bioparc Fuengirola's newest area. After 6 years of construction and an investment of nearly 10 million euros, what's likely the park's final expansion opened in 2024. El viaje infinito, the infinite journey, is inspired by Juan Sebastián Elcano and the crew of the New Victoria, who achieved the very first circumnavigation of the globe. Our slightly shorter journey begins at a plaza with a central spherical structure that represents how people once imagined the universe. And at the surrounding walls you can admire elaborate paintings. Beyond the plaza, the journey then continues into a dark hall featuring saltwater aquariums. Here we encounter the vibrant diversity of oceans and reefs that early Spanish explorers came across upon arriving in the Americas. And since the room is really dark, the tanks and their inhabitants stand out all the more, with the main highlight probably being the zebra shark, which continuously swam in the same tight circle in its rather small tank. Why something like this is still done in a modern aquarium is honestly beyond me. Either leave it out or build accordingly, but instead they gave most of the space to the visitors. Fortunately though, this is my only major criticism of the entire section, which now leads us further into the heart of the American continent. After the marine tanks, this room presents aquariums depicting life in the rivers of the Amazon, starting with rather smaller fish species. And then we step into the impressively designed Explorers Hall. Here 2 enormous globes and a large wall mural pay tribute to Spanish seafarers and their achievements. Rows of semicircular arches in arcades evoke Romanesque architecture, whose massive and weighty appearance turns the entire space into an architectural highlight. At the far end, one looks through similar arches into a large aquarium designed like the ruins of a Maya temple. Here we can see larger Amazon inhabitants such as the ever-impressive arapaimas, as well as ocellate river stingrays. Paddlefish, on the other hand, actually come from North America and the Mississippi River system. The inhabitants of this tank become even more impressive in the underwater tunnel, which also leads us into the grand finale of this area. Because we emerge in the middle of a large walk-through aviary that brings the South American rainforest to life with a wide variety of plants and temple ruins. A fantastic habitat for the many animals living here, offering them ample space and a naturalistic environment. It's definitely worth passing through multiple times because thanks to the dense vegetation, the different inhabitants don't always reveal themselves. On my first round I didn't see much, but on my second attempt I spotted the Goldies monkeys leaping across the ruins, while above me an American black vulture demonstrated that the aviary's 14-meter height offers plenty of room for aerial acrobatics. The ochre-marked parakeets even made close contact with me and were particularly interested in my backpack, testing its craftsmanship with their beaks. So there's definitely a lot to experience here, even if you'll probably never see everything. I, for example, couldn't spot a sloth, even though I tried 3 times. But that's okay, because I was able to observe the family of giant otters being very active. They live in an adjacent enclosure that is beautifully designed and can be viewed from a gallery walkway. Additionally, there are underwater viewing areas in the aviary that look into their pool, which is way deeper than you might think at first. And at the edge it flows into a waterfall where the giant otters showed off their full agility. And the different levels within the enclosure once again show how a complex structure can create an engaging environment for the animals, even if the overall space isn't particularly large. The entire expansion area covers just 2,800 square meters, but they've made the most of it. The visitor experience is impressive thanks to its strong conceptual design. It definitely leaves a lasting impression. Using Spanish seafaring history as a narrative framework was a brilliant idea. Combined with breathtaking scenery and at times pompous architecture, it creates an experience that goes far beyond simply observing animals, however, without the animals themselves fading into the background. For me, this is not only clearly the strongest area in this entire zoo, but also one of the best modern zoo projects in general, something other zoos could certainly take inspiration from. I wish more zoos would build their new exhibits around such a clear concept instead of relying and more or less copying the same old themes we have seen so many times. At most, one could criticize that a circumnavigation of the globe shouldn't really end in South America alone, because after this aviary, el viaje infinito turns out to be rather finito. And with that, our tour also comes to an end, as I've shown you everything Bioparc Fuengirola has to offer. And I think you'll agree, for just 22,000 square meters, it does offer a lot. Maybe even a bit too much. The newer exhibits certainly show how to make the most of a limited space and still provide varied habitats. But in my opinion, that doesn't work everywhere. Even in the newest section, there is an example suggesting it might have been better to forgo one or two additional highlight species. So I leave Fuengirola with a very similar feeling to the one I had last year at its sister zoo, Bioparc Valencia. You can just tell that they are both designed and operated by Rainforest. I mean, the company's concept is just very evident in both parks. Elaborate and impressive scenery almost completely conceals traditional zoo architecture, replacing it with artificial landscapes intended to bring us closer not only to the animals but also their habitats. This works extremely well and creates a consistently impressive visitor experience that few other zoos can match. I just wish both parks were significantly larger, because behind the beautiful facade, some enclosures still feel too small. The issue feels even more pronounced in Valencia, where large animals and savanna species such as giraffes or larger pachyderms are kept. The focus on tropical animals fits better with compact park layouts, since dense rainforests are naturally more intricate and structured, where savanna landscapes are defined by their openness and vastness. In the end, this remains a zoo that is visually and conceptually outstanding, but also demonstrates that limited space cannot be completely disguised. Structure, enrichment, and design are of course more important than sheer size, but in smaller enclosures you inevitably reach limits more quickly. So Bioparc Fuengirola is definitely a worthwhile visit, but despite all admiration for the immersive design, one should not forget to look behind the impressive facade and maintain a critical perspective on animal welfare. With that mindset, Rainforest can build even better zoos in the future, perhaps already on Mallorca, where they recently took over the safari zoo I showed you a few weeks ago. So if you're new here, I've already got 2 more videos that might interest you. Feel free to check them out and subscribe for more zoo reviews from across Europe and maybe soon the entire world. And as always, I appreciate a like and especially your comments. Let me know what you think about Bioparc Fuengirola or the Rainforest Zoo concept in general. I'd love to hear from you, and with that, take care, see you soon, adios und auf Wiedersehen, yours Martin.